Captain Aurelia Rhine stood before the vast observation window of the nebula's edge, her fingers lightly resting on the edge of the cool glass. Beyond her, the crew of the starship worked tirelessly, their eyes focused on the shifting holographic displays. But for Aurelia, it was the stars that demanded her attention. Space had always been a vast, unexplored frontier, but recently it had begun to feel different, more alive. There was a subtle pull, an inexplicable sense of purpose drawing her toward the unknown reaches of the galaxy. She had served as a captain for years, leading missions across known systems, but nothing had prepared her for the sense of destiny she now felt. The call of the stars was undeniable. "There is something out there," she murmured under her breath, her voice tinged with excitement and curiosity. "Something waiting for us." Her fingers traced the contours of the star map in front of her, highlighting a distant, uncharted sector of the galaxy. "Let's see what the void really holds." Her gaze shifted to the rest of her crew, their energy palpable, focused, and ready. The nebula's edge was prepped for a new voyage, a journey that would take them to the edge of known space, into the galactic void, where few had ventured. And Aurelia was certain that this journey would change everything. The hum of the ship's engines was the only sound that filled the bridge, but it was accompanied by an unsettling silence that seemed to stretch across the vastness of the nebula. Captain Aurelia Rhine's eyes flicked from one screen to another, each displaying data streams that suggested the same thing. The nebula was far denser than anticipated. Her crew was experienced, but even they couldn't hide the growing unease in the air. "We're not just dealing with cosmic dust and gas here," said Lieutenant Mason, her first officer, standing at Aurelia's side. His voice broke through the tense silence, and the way he held himself suggested concern. "The sensors are picking up anomalies. Energy readings that don't match anything we've encountered before. It's like the nebula is alive." Aurelia looked at the readouts on her console, her brow furrowing. The strange energy spikes seemed to pulse, rhythmic in nature, as though the nebula itself had a heartbeat. She felt the same sense of unease that Mason did. Whatever this was, it wasn't natural. "We need to find out what's causing these readings," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the tension. "Prepare a reconnaissance team. We'll approach the center of this anomaly. Let's see what secrets it's hiding." The crew members exchanged brief glances before getting to work, adjusting controls and prepping the ship for a deeper journey into the heart of the nebula. But Aurelia couldn't shake the feeling that the nebula wasn't the only thing waiting for them out there. As the ship ventured deeper into the heart of the nebula, the atmosphere around the nebula's edge grew heavier. The energy readings grew more erratic, like the pulse of something ancient, something vast. Captain Aurelia Rhine stood at the observation window, watching as the swirling gases of the nebula surrounded them, the ship now fully enveloped by the strange, colorful clouds. The ship's sensors barely functioned at this depth, and outside, the view was nothing but brilliant colors swirling into a chaotic vortex. "We're in too deep," Lieutenant Mason's voice came through the comms, tinged with both awe and apprehension. "Sensors are failing, and we're approaching something large." Aurelia turned to face him, her eyes narrowed. "We've come this far, Mason. Keep your team on standby. Prepare for anything." The ship's hull shuddered as a strange force field seemed to pulse from the nebula. Aurelia felt a cold shiver run down her spine as the starship's lights flickered. For a brief moment, everything went dark, and then the lights returned, revealing a sight that made every crew member hold their breath. Out in the distance, just past the nebula's glowing edge, was a massive ancient structure. A space station, or perhaps something more. It was larger than any station they had ever seen, its dark metallic surface reflecting the nebula's eerie glow. "We found it," Aurelia whispered, her voice barely audible. The unknown station. The crew of the nebula's edge gathered on the bridge as the ship approached the ancient structure. The station, unlike anything they had ever encountered, sat motionless in the middle of the nebula, its massive form casting a looming shadow over the ship. Despite the station's ominous presence, the crew was drawn to it, as if it held the key to an unknown mystery. "We're entering the station's gravitational pull," Lieutenant Mason called out, his voice steady but filled with a sense of awe. There's no turning back now. Aurelia nodded, her fingers lightly tapping the console. Prepare a landing party. We're going in. This might be the breakthrough we've been looking for. The ship's engines whined as it drew closer, the docking bays of the station visible now, dark, empty, and waiting. Outside, the nebula continued to swirl, casting an eerie glow over the station's surface. The station was silent, as if it had been waiting for someone, or something. Aurelia glanced at the crew. Let's find out what's inside. The docking bay of the ancient station was vast, its high ceilings disappearing into the darkness above. Captain Aurelia Rhine and her landing party stepped off the ramp of the nebula's edge and onto the cold metal floor of the station. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft echoes of their footsteps as they moved deeper into the station. The atmosphere felt heavy, oppressive, as though the station was watching them. The walls were covered with strange symbols and markings that none of the crew could decipher. At the far end of the bay, a massive doorway stood open, leading into the heart of the station. "This place doesn't feel right," Lieutenant Mason muttered, his voice low. "It's like it's been waiting for us." Aurelia nodded, her eyes scanning the surroundings. "Stay alert. We don't know what we'll find here." As they ventured deeper, the station's eerie stillness weighed on them. Every step seemed to bring them closer to something ancient, something that had been buried for centuries. The question was no longer whether they would uncover the station's secrets, but what they would awaken by doing so. As the landing party ventured deeper into the ancient station, the sense of unease only grew. The vast corridors stretched out before them, the walls covered in strange shifting symbols that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Captain Aurelia Rhine led the way, her footsteps echoing through the silence. The air was still, but the walls seemed to hum with energy, an energy that seemed to recognize their presence. "Nothing about this feels right," Lieutenant Mason murmured, glancing nervously at the crew. His voice was strained as he spoke. "This place, it's alive. It knows we're here." Aurelia didn't reply immediately, her eyes scanning the surroundings. The station's silence was oppressive, but there was something more. It was as though the station was waiting for them, drawing them in with an ancient pull. She reached out to touch one of the symbols on the wall. The moment her fingers brushed against it, the lights in the corridor flickered. The hum of the station grew louder, and the walls seemed to shift slightly. "Move out," Aurelia ordered, her voice firm. "We don't know what we're dealing with, but we need to keep moving." The deeper they went, the more the station seemed to close in around them. The corridors became narrower, and the temperature dropped significantly. Aurelia noticed her breath turning to mist as she exhaled, the air growing colder with each step. It wasn't just the temperature, it was the overwhelming presence of something ancient and forgotten. The walls of the station were covered with unfamiliar markings that seemed to pulse as if the structure itself were alive, reacting to their presence. "We're getting too deep into this place," Lieutenant Mason said, his voice tense as he adjusted his equipment. "I don't like this. Something's wrong." Aurelia nodded, her hand resting on the hilt of her sidearm. She could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up, but she refused to show fear in front of her crew. The unknown stretched before them, a dark abyss they had no choice but to explore. "We keep going," Aurelia said firmly. "There's no turning back now. Let's find the heart of this station." They moved on, passing under an archway that seemed to hum with energy, a subtle vibration running through the walls. The air became thick with tension as they approached the center of the station. As they entered the heart of the station, they discovered what seemed to be a control room of sorts, though it was unlike anything they had ever seen. The walls were covered in alien consoles, their surfaces darkened by age but still intact. Strange glyphs and symbols covered every surface, and the room pulsed with an eerie light, as though something dormant inside the station was awakening. Aurelia stepped forward, her hand brushing across one of the consoles. The moment she did, the room came alive. Lights flickered, and a low hum filled the air. The symbols on the walls shifted, rearranging themselves as though responding to her touch. The energy in the room grew intense, and a holographic display flickered to life in the center of the room, projecting a map of the galaxy. A map that was unfamiliar. Is this? Mason started, his voice trembling with disbelief. Aurelia nodded slowly. It's not a map of any known systems, she said, her voice calm but with a hint of awe. This is something completely new. Suddenly, the floor beneath them vibrated, and a deep rumble shook the room. The walls seemed to groan as if the station were alive, and the air crackled with energy. The rumble grew louder, and suddenly, the station seemed to react violently to their presence. Aurelia's instincts kicked in, and she immediately ordered her crew to brace for impact. The walls of the control room cracked, as a strange mechanical sound filled the air. Something inside the station was activating. Something ancient. Everyone move! Aurelia commanded, pushing her crew into action. We need to get out of here now. But before they could reach the exit, the station's massive doors slammed shut with a deafening crash. The crew was trapped inside. Mason cursed under his breath, running to the door and pounding on it, but it didn't budge. We're locked in, he shouted. What the hell's going on? Aurelia was already scanning the room for another way out. Keep calm, we'll find another way. This station might be ancient, but it's not invincible. The room around them seemed to pulse as the hum grew louder, and a deep voice, mechanical, almost ghostly, echoed from the walls. Welcome to the heart of the void. The mechanical voice echoed again, sending a chill down Aurelia's spine. It wasn't just a voice, it was the station itself, or perhaps something that had taken residence within it. The crew stood in silence, fear evident in their eyes, but Aurelia was resolute. This was no time for panic. We need to find the core of this station, she said, her voice firm. It's the only way to stop whatever's happening here. Mason looked at her with wide eyes, his voice filled with disbelief. The core? Are you telling me we have to go deeper into this place? Yes, Aurelia replied, her gaze unwavering. We need to stop the source before it can fully awaken. With no other choice, the crew set out to find the station's core. The hallways seemed to stretch endlessly, each turn bringing them deeper into the heart of the station. The walls, once silent, now groaned and pulsed with energy. Something ancient was waking, and it was determined to make its presence known. As they moved forward, Aurelia couldn't help but feel that this wasn't just a station. It was a trap. And they were the prey. The deeper the crew of the nebula's edge ventured into the heart of the station, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The once imposing corridors had now turned into narrow, claustrophobic passageways. Aurelia led the way, her mind racing with questions. What kind of station was this? What had caused its mysterious awakening? We're getting closer, Lieutenant Mason said, his voice tight with anticipation. He adjusted his weapon, keeping a sharp eye on the surroundings. The low hum of the station had turned into a constant vibration underfoot, sending a pulse of unease through the entire crew. As they passed under an archway that seemed to shimmer with energy, the walls of the station began to glow faintly. This feels like it's more than just a station, Mason muttered, his eyes scanning the walls which now seemed to breathe, as if the structure itself were alive. Aurelia paused for a moment, her hand resting on the cool surface of the wall. It's not just a station, Mason, it's a vessel, a living machine of sorts. We need to reach the core before it fully awakens. Suddenly, the floor beneath them shuddered violently, and the walls pulsed with light. We're not alone here, Aurelia said quietly, her eyes narrowing. Get ready. The crew arrived at a massive chamber, its ceiling far above, lost in shadow. The walls were lined with strange arcane machinery that hummed with energy, their surfaces covered in unfamiliar symbols. A pulsing, rhythmic beat seemed to emanate from the center of the room. The air was thick with an odd metallic scent, and the floor vibrated underfoot. Aurelia's heart raced as she looked around, the unease settling into her bones. This is the core, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The center of the station's power. Mason stepped forward, scanning the surroundings with his sensor. The energy readings are off the charts. Whatever this place is, it's connected to the nebula. It's drawing power from the very fabric of space itself. The team gathered around the central structure of the room, a towering machine surrounded by a series of interconnected conduits. At the heart of it, an orb pulsated with a dark, eerie light. "That's it," Aurelia said. "That's the source. Whatever it is, it's what's keeping this place alive." Before anyone could react, the orb flickered, and a sudden surge of energy shot through the room. The ground shook violently, and the ceiling overhead cracked, sending debris falling. The station was coming to life, awakening after centuries of dormancy. The energy surge from the orb sent shockwaves throughout the station. Aurelia's crew scrambled to stay on their feet as the walls and floor of the station cracked and groaned under the immense pressure. The hum of the machinery grew louder, now joined by a mechanical, disembodied voice that echoed through the chamber. "Who dares to awaken the void?" The voice boomed, its tone ancient and cold. "You trespass on sacred ground. The heart of the void belongs to no one." The crew exchanged fearful glances, their weapons raised but their hands trembling. The air in the chamber thickened, and the once quiet walls now pulsed with a growing intensity. Aurelia steadied herself, her voice strong despite the growing sense of dread. "We're not here to conquer," she called out, her voice resonating through the room. "We just need answers. What is this station? What power does it hold?" The voice responded, its tone colder and more menacing. "You seek answers, but you shall receive only chaos. The void is not meant for the living." Suddenly, the orb flared brighter, and the ground beneath the crew began to crumble. The room was in complete disarray as the crew struggled to keep their footing. The orb's energy was no longer just a pulse. It was a force, shaking the very foundations of the station. Aurelia gritted her teeth, her mind racing for a solution. They couldn't leave without answers, but the station was reacting as though they were the enemy. "We need to stabilize it," she shouted to her team. "Mason, find a way to disrupt the flow of energy. Reyes, assist him." Lieutenant Mason and crewman Reyes immediately moved to the control panels, their hands flying over the alien interfaces. The machines surrounding the orb pulsed in response to their movements, but the force field around it was too strong. Aurelia watched them work, her mind trying to piece together what was happening. The energy from the nebula was feeding the station, but it was also warping reality around them. The very fabric of space was being distorted, and it seemed that the station was not merely a power source. It was a portal. "Whatever this thing is," Aurelia said, her voice grim, "it's pulling in energy from the void itself, and we're caught in the middle." The orb flared again, and the room trembled as if the station were about to collapse entirely. "We need to shut it down now," Aurelia shouted. The orb's light intensified, casting sharp shadows across the room. The crew continued to work, but the energy readings were spiking uncontrollably. The once hidden symbols on the walls began to shift rapidly, and the air became thick with static. It was clear that something had been awakened, something that had been dormant for millennia. Aurelia stood at the heart of the chaos, her thoughts racing. The station wasn't just a relic. It was a sentient being, tied to the energy of the Galactic Void. And now, it was awake, its power thrumming through the fabric of space. It was drawing them in. They were caught between the station's energy and the very fabric of the galaxy. "We need to find the core's shutdown protocol," Aurelia said, voice strained. "If we can't stop it, the entire station will collapse, and it might take us with it." As Mason and Reyes worked desperately, Aurelia could feel the air around her grow heavier. The station was alive, aware, and it was reacting to their presence. It wasn't just a structure. It was a consciousness, ancient and powerful, and it wasn't about to let them leave. The room continued to shake violently as the nebula's edge crew struggled to contain the surging energy emanating from the orb. The air was thick with the hum of power, each pulse sending tremors through the walls. Despite their best efforts, the systems were failing. The controls on the walls flickered erratically, and the strange symbols now seemed to be spreading, crawling across the floor, the ceiling, and the walls like a living organism. "Captain, we're losing control," Mason shouted, his voice strained. "The energy surges are destabilizing the entire station. If we don't get out now..." Aurelia turned to him, her face pale, but resolute. We can't leave yet, we're so close. This station has answers. Answers to everything. Why was it built? What's its true purpose? But Mason shook his head, pointing to the readings on his console. The purpose is to draw energy from the void, Aurelia. It's not a machine, it's a conduit. And it's collapsing, taking us with. Aurelia didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to panic. Then we'll stop it. We need to find the heart of the station. That's where we can disable it. With a final glance at Mason, she moved toward the control center, determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Aurelia's mind raced as she led her team deeper into the station's heart. The corridors had become labyrinthine, twisting and narrowing as if the station itself was closing in on them. The air was thick with a strange hum, a constant vibration that made the walls feel alive. It was clear now that the station wasn't just powered by the nebula. It was symbiotic with the void itself. Its very existence was an anomaly, a bridge between dimensions. We're not just dealing with a machine, Aurelia said, her voice steady but filled with awe. This station is a living entity, and it's awakening, feeding on the energy of the void. We've unleashed something far more dangerous than we imagined. Mason looked around, his eyes filled with fear. We need to stop it before it spreads. If this thing reaches critical mass, it could tear a hole in space itself. Then we need to reach the core. Quickly, Aurelia replied. Move out. The crew advanced cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the growing hum of the station. It wasn't just their lives at stake now. It was the entire galaxy. The deeper they went, the more intense the station's energy became. Every step brought them closer to the center, where the true power of the station lay. But with every passing moment, the danger grew. The walls were now covered with a network of veins, dark, pulsating lines that seemed to move as if alive. The floor was slick with some sort of black substance, and the air tasted metallic, thick with an unnatural charge. We're almost there, Aurelia said, her voice unwavering. Just a little further. Mason glanced around, his expression filled with both awe and concern. This station it's not just a source of power. It's a prison. Whatever was contained here has been set free. Aurelia's heart skipped a beat. Prison? Mason nodded, his eyes narrowing. This isn't just a scientific facility, it's something much older, something that was meant to be locked away. As they reached the final door to the station's core, Aurelia felt a shiver run down her spine. They weren't just dealing with a station, they were dealing with something far worse. Aurelia stepped forward, her eyes locked on the massive crystalline core at the center of the chamber. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. An enormous structure, shimmering with unnatural light, suspended in the middle of the room by an invisible force. As she stepped closer, the air became charged, humming with a palpable intensity. The core seemed to respond to her presence, its light shifting, the colors changing. This is it, she said, her voice steady, but a sense of awe lingered. This is what's been causing the energy surges. Mason stepped beside her, his voice barely above a whisper. I think we've just found the heart of the station. And whatever it's been keeping locked away. Aurelia took a deep breath, her eyes focused on the core. If we don't shut it down, it could destroy everything. The core pulsed again, this time with a violent surge of energy. The room around them shuddered, and the walls seemed to close in. The station was coming to life, and it was responding to them. The core flared one last time, the energy spilling over in violent waves. Aurelia knew they had no time left. Mason, Reyes, find a way to disable the core. The rest of you, help me stabilize the energy flow. Mason and Reyes moved quickly to the control panels, but the machinery around them was malfunctioning, sparking and crackling. The core was too powerful, its energy too chaotic. It was as if the station had become sentient, responding to every movement. Aurelia moved toward the central conduit, her hands shaking as she adjusted the dials. We have to channel the energy away from the core, redirect it before the station's core overloads. Just as the crew managed to stabilize the flow, the station rumbled once more, and a sudden flash of bright light erupted from the core, blinding them all. When the light faded, The station's pulse had quieted. The walls stopped vibrating, and the eerie hum of the station began to die down. The crew stood in stunned silence. "Did we do it?" Mason asked, his voice hoarse. Aurelia nodded, her breath heavy. "I think we did, but we've barely scratched the surface. This station is part of something much bigger." She looked around at her crew, their expressions a mix of relief and uncertainty. "But we're not finished yet. We need to find out what we've truly awakened." The station, once trembling with energy, now stood still. The crew gathered in the heart of the control room, the air thick with anticipation. Aurelia stood before the central console, her eyes scanning the data feeds. The core's energy had been subdued, but the damage was done. The station was still active, still alive in ways they couldn't fully comprehend. "We've slowed it down, but this isn't over," Aurelia said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "The energy surge may have stopped, but the station's power is still fluctuating. We need to understand what's truly at the heart of this." Mason stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "Captain, we've only seen a fraction of what this place can do. I think we're dealing with something far more powerful. Something that isn't just tied to the station itself, but to the fabric of space." Aurelia nodded, her gaze hardening. "We're dealing with a force older than the galaxy itself. We need to find its source." The crew moved forward, knowing that the discovery of the station was just the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead. They weren't just exploring ancient technology. They were uncovering a force that could change everything. The crew made their way deeper into the station, following a series of unfamiliar corridors. The walls now appeared less like solid surfaces and more like the living, breathing exterior of a creature. The air felt thick with an unnatural energy, and the further they went, the more disorienting the station became. It wasn't just an ancient machine, it was a living entity, a bridge between realms. "Are we really sure we want to keep going?" Mason asked, his voice tense. "This place is changing us. I can feel it." Aurelia didn't look back. "We don't have a choice. The station is waking up, Mason. It's pulling us towards something. We need to find out what it wants." They rounded another corner, and ahead of them, a massive door loomed, ancient and inscribed with symbols they hadn't seen before. It was different from everything else in the station. "Is this it?" Reyes asked. Aurelia stepped forward, her hand reaching for the door. "This is where we'll find out." The moment she touched the door, it began to open, revealing a chamber far larger than any they had seen before. Beyond the door lay a vast chamber, its size impossible to comprehend. The walls stretched upward, disappearing into shadows. The floor was made of dark reflective material that seemed to shimmer with an unnatural light. In the center of the room stood a colossal structure, something that appeared to be a core, but unlike anything they had seen before. It was a perfect sphere, radiating an otherworldly energy. "This is it," Aurelia whispered, her voice filled with awe. "This is what has been pulling us here." The core was far larger than anything they had expected. It was not just a power source, it was a conduit, a way to tap into a force beyond comprehension. "What is it?" Reyes asked, her voice shaky. "It's like nothing I've ever seen." Aurelia's gaze never wavered from the core. "It's a doorway to something beyond our understanding." Before anyone could react, the core pulsed again, and the room began to rumble. The walls seemed to shift, and strange, ghostly figures appeared in the shadows. They were projections, images from another time, perhaps from the very creation of the station. The core pulsed again, sending out waves of energy that washed over the crew. Aurelia felt her head spin as the room distorted around her. The projections of figures began to take shape, showing glimpses of ancient civilizations, beings of light and shadow who had once used the core as a gateway to the void. They had sought power, but the cost had been too great. The core was a tool, but it was also a prison, locking away the very force they had hoped to control. "What happened to them?" Mason asked, his voice trembling as he observed the projections. "They were consumed," Aurelia said, her eyes narrowing as the realization hit. "They tried to control the void, but it destroyed them. The core wasn't just a power source. It was a trap." The energy around them grew stronger, and the projections began to scream, their voices filling the chamber. It was as if they were warning the crew, pleading for them to leave before they suffered the same fate. "Get to the control room," Aurelia shouted, pulling the crew toward the exit. "Now!" The crew scrambled through the corridors, the rumble of the station intensifying. Aurelia's heart raced as she pushed forward, the sound of the projection's voices still echoing in her mind. Whatever the core was, it had been tampered with, and now it was out of control. The station systems were no longer functioning normally. Everything was in chaos. "We have to stop it," Mason yelled, his voice barely audible over the increasing noise. Aurelia nodded, her eyes focused on the path ahead. "We need to shut down the core, or the entire station will collapse in on itself." But as they neared the central control room, the station itself seemed to fight them, its walls shifting and closing in. The floor buckled beneath their feet as if the station was trying to trap them. The lights flickered, and the air grew thick with static. Aurelia had no choice but to push forward. There was no turning back now. "We're almost there," she shouted, rallying the crew. "We stop it now, or we never leave." The rumble beneath the nebula's edge grew deafening as the crew raced through the collapsing station. Aurelia's heart pounded in her chest as she led the team toward the central control room. Every step felt like an eternity. The walls of the station were now twisting, contracting, as if the very foundation of the structure was buckling under the strain. The core's energy was fluctuating wildly, sending waves of distortion through the air, making everything feel unreal. "We're running out of time," Mason shouted, his voice strained with the effort to keep pace. "The energy surges are getting worse. If we don't shut this thing down soon, the station will implode." Aurelia glanced over her shoulder. Her team was close behind, but the chaos of the station was taking its toll. "We're almost there, keep moving." But deep down, Aurelia knew that even if they reached the core, there was no guarantee they could stop the station's awakening. The force they had unleashed was beyond their comprehension. As they rounded another corner, a sudden wave of energy slammed into them, throwing the crew to the ground. Aurelia struggled to her feet, gasping for breath. The station was no longer just a machine, it was a living nightmare consuming everything in its path. The control room was just ahead, but the closer they got, the more intense the energy surges became. The air was thick with static, and the walls seemed to pulse with a living energy. Aurelia felt a sharp pain in her chest as the energy intensified, her body reacting to the power of the station. "We have to hurry," Reyes cried, her voice filled with urgency. "The core's energy is about to peak. If we don't stop it now, the entire galaxy could be at risk." Aurelia nodded, wiping the sweat from her brow. "We'll stop it. We have to." They reached the control room, and Aurelia's eyes immediately fell on the central console. The massive holographic display flickered as it displayed the station's status, energy surges, critical levels, and countdowns that indicated a catastrophic event was imminent. The core was about to collapse under the strain of the energy it had been drawing from the void. "We need to shut it down now," Aurelia shouted, rushing to the console. But as she reached for the control, the entire room shuddered violently. The walls began to crack, and the lights flickered on and off. The station was on the verge of self-destruction. "Captain, it's no use," Mason shouted from across the room. "The system's locked. We can't disengage the core." Aurelia's heart sank as she realized what was happening. The station systems were too far gone. The core had been designed to be indestructible, its purpose far beyond their understanding. They couldn't just shut it down. They had to find a way to destroy it, or it would destroy everything. "Then we'll have to destroy it manually," Aurelia said, her voice filled with cold resolve. She turned to Mason, her eyes steely. "We're going in. Prepare for a direct approach." Mason looked back at her, disbelief in his eyes. "You're not serious. We don't even know what's inside that thing." "I don't care," Aurelia replied sharply. "We do what we have to. Get the explosives ready." The crew began to work quickly, but Aurelia couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The core's energy was growing uncontrollably, and the station's walls were closing in around them. The crew entered the core chamber, the ground trembling beneath their feet. The enormous alien structure loomed before them, its surface crackling with energy. Aurelia's breath came in short gasps as she surveyed the room, her eyes locking on the core. It was larger than she had imagined, its surface shifting, as if alive, the energy swirling around it like a vortex. "This is it," she said, her voice filled with awe and fear. "We placed the charges here." Mason nodded, pulling out the explosives. "It's going to be risky. We'll have to place them at the heart of the core. But once we do, there's no turning back." Aurelia looked at her team, their faces filled with resolve. They had come this far, and they couldn't stop now. "We do it together," she said firmly. "Let's finish this." As Mason and Reyes began to place the charges, the core surged again, and the air around them grew thick with energy. The station was fighting back. With the explosives set, the crew retreated to a safe distance, the air thick with anticipation. Aurelia's heart raced as she activated the detonator. The core flashed once more, its light blinding, and the room shook violently. They were moments away from either destroying the station or being consumed by it. The hum of the core grew louder, and the walls of the chamber cracked. Aurelia could feel the station's presence pressing in on her. It was as if the station was alive, fighting against them, refusing to let go. "Get ready," Aurelia shouted, her hand hovering over the detonator. "Do it!" Mason yelled. Aurelia slammed her hand down on the button, and the explosion tore through the chamber. The station screamed as the core erupted in a violent burst of energy. The force sent them all flying, the walls cracking and breaking as the station began to collapse. When the dust settled, Aurelia pushed herself to her feet, her eyes scanning the wreckage. The core was destroyed, but at what cost? The station's walls were crumbling, and the ship was still trapped inside. The destruction of the core sent shockwaves through the station, and for a moment everything went silent. Captain Aurelia Rhine stood amidst the wreckage, her heart pounding in her chest. The once intense glow of the core had faded, replaced by the eerie silence of a station on the verge of collapse. The walls were cracked, and the ceiling groaned as if the very foundation was being torn apart. The energy that had once filled the space now seemed to dissipate into the void. "We did it," Mason said, his voice trembling with disbelief. "But at what cost?" Aurelia's gaze swept over the destruction. The station was falling apart around them. The walls were collapsing, and the systems were failing. But they had succeeded. The core, the very heart of the station's power, was destroyed. "We need to get out of here," Aurelia said firmly. "Now." But as they turned to leave, a deep rumble shook the floor. The station wasn't done with them yet. The crew raced through the corridors of the collapsing station, the sound of crumbling walls and groaning metal filling their ears. The once narrow hallways now seemed to stretch forever, the way forward, uncertain as the station shifted and twisted around them. The air was thick with dust, and the faint glow of emergency lights flickered weakly overhead. "We can't outrun it," Reyes shouted as a massive beam fell from the ceiling, blocking their path. "Move!" Aurelia shouted back, her voice filled with urgency. "We have to get to the shuttle bay. It's our only chance." The crew scrambled to find a way forward, pushing through the debris and trying to stay ahead of the collapsing station. But the walls were closing in faster than they could run. Time was running out. The shuttle bay doors loomed ahead, but as they approached, they heard the unmistakable sound of metal tearing and screeching. The station wasn't just collapsing, it was imploding. The very foundation was unraveling, and the energy from the core's destruction had destabilized the entire structure. The crew was caught in a race against the inevitable. "We're almost there," Aurelia shouted, her voice filled with determination. But as they neared the shuttle bay, the floor beneath them cracked open, and the entire corridor buckled. Aurelia's heart skipped a beat as she watched the ground collapse. They were cut off. "Mason, Reyes, can you clear a path?" she asked urgently. Mason and Reyes rushed forward, using their tools to try to cut through the debris. But the station was fighting back, its structure buckling and shifting as if it were alive. The walls groaned under the strain, and the shuttle bay doors remained closed, sealed by the destruction. With no other option, Aurelia made the decision to act. "We're going to have to override the system. If we can't get the shuttle bay doors open manually, we'll do it ourselves." Mason and Reyes nodded in agreement, their eyes focused on the task at hand. The pressure was mounting. The walls were cracking, and the ceiling above them was beginning to cave in. Time was slipping away, and every second counted. Aurelia moved to the console, her fingers flying over the keys. The display flickered and sparked as she attempted to override the system. The lights above them dimmed even further, and the hum of the station systems began to falter. "We don't have much time," she muttered, frustration creeping into her voice. Come on, come on." Suddenly, the console beeped, and the shuttle bay doors began to slowly open, revealing a narrow escape route. The crew wasted no time. With the shuttle bay doors finally open, the crew rushed through, barely making it to the shuttle before the station's collapse became irreversible. As they entered the shuttle, Aurelia's mind raced. They had survived. But what had they truly awakened? What consequences awaited them in the aftermath of their actions? "We made it," Mason said, breathless, as he strapped into his seat. Aurelia nodded, her eyes fixed on the station's fading silhouette outside the shuttle's windows. "For now," she said quietly. "But this isn't over, not by a long shot." The shuttle's engines roared to life as they pulled away from the collapsing station, leaving the wreckage behind. The stars ahead were their only certainty, but even they held secrets waiting to be uncovered. The crew had no idea what would come next. They had only begun to scratch the surface of the mystery they had unearthed. But for now, they had survived. And that was enough.